asshole. This is Epistemic Permissiveness by Roger White of NYU in Philosophical Perspectives back in 2005, I guess. Yeah. So, yeah. I think now of the MIT. So, as always, feel free to let me know what you think. We're just going to read this. I've never read this before. I thank you, Vipers, for finding something short because no, it's 15 pages. Oh, dear God. I thought it was 4 pages. And we'll try to get through this. I'm going to die. I'm going to die. But there we go. I'm going to die. And we'll try to get through this and see what it's about. Anyway, let me know, and then we rate it at the end. Yeah, we're all going to die. Well, I'm going to die now. We're not all going to die now. I may die now. Anyway, a rational person doesn't... let me see. Yeah, okay. A rational person doesn't believe just anything. There are limits on what it is rational to believe. How wide are these limits? That's the main question that interests me here. But a secondary question immediately arises. What factors impose these limits? Just ignore the dumb comments certain chat members make. Yeah, I will do that. There you go, Vipers. Can just... Yeah, I was going to be like, you can time yourself out if you want. A first stab is to say that one's evidence determines what it is epistemically permissible for ones to believe. I wonder if Ivan's still around. He must love this so much. First stab is to say what one's evidence determines what it is epistemically permissible for one to believe. Yeah, that's the thing you can't... okay. Well, I think you can unmod yourself. You might be able to. I don't know. But whatever. If you want. Many will claim that there are further non-evidentiary factors relevant to the epistemic rationality of belief. I will be ignoring the details of alternative answers in order to focus on the question of what kind of rational constraints one's evidence puts on belief. Our main question concerns how far epistemic permission and obligation can come apart. Suppose I am epistemically permitted to believe P, that is, it would not be irrational for me to believe in it. Am I thereby obliged to believe P, or are there other options rationally available to me? Might I be equally rational and remaining agnostic about P or believing not P? Or could even a slightly stronger or weaker degree of confidence be just as reasonable? Alright, so if you don't know the truth of something, but you could say it would make sense that you do believe it, what should you do, I guess? Alright, so following are examples and motivations for permissive epistemology. Following Feldman forthcoming, we can call the negative answer the uniqueness thesis. Uniqueness. Given one's total evidence, there is a unique, rational, doxastic attitude that one can take to any proposition. Yeah, so you can basically be like, I either believe that, don't believe that, or don't care, whatever it is.
Nobody has the intention to posting dumb comments or interrupt the stream in any way.
Accurate. Alright, I call the proposition that depart from uniqueness permissive as they entail that epistemic rationality permits a range of alternative doxastic attitudes. Yeah, so you might be allowed to have different opinions about a proposition that are all okay. So either it's unique or you can have a range. Yeah. Many philosophers hold permissive epistemologies. Rejection of uniqueness is prominent in Bas van Frassen's epistemology. Proponents of conservatism suggest that you are prima facie justified in maintaining your beliefs until you have a reason to abandon them. So had you drawn a different conclusion from the same evidence, you would be fully rational in continuing to hold it, at least until challenged. According to Richard Foley, a belief is epistemically rational if upon sufficient reflection, you would think that holding that belief was an effective means to achieving the goal of believing just what is true. The condition fails to single out a unique set of beliefs for any given evidence. It seems that the method of seeking reflective equilibrium need not terminate in a unique set of convictions. There might be you can conceive of the world could be a few different ways. You don't know which one of the ways the world is, so you kind of equally believe a few different things, and you say, I don't know which it is, but it's going to be among these possibilities. And that's not a crazy thing that could happen. Yeah. So if that is the ultimate standard of rationality, uniqueness is false. According to the subjectivist version of Bayesianism, yep, so here we go, because we're getting real fucking close to Bayesianism, the only rational constraint on one's initial degrees of belief is conformity to the probability calculus. While some Bayesians are uncomfortable with the degree of permissiveness, the constraints that they are willing to add fall fall far short of uniqueness. Yeah, because again, if you have 30% for this one, 30% for that one, 30% for another one, and then 10% of something wacky, then you'd be permitted to say, well, 1/3 on all, well, not 1/3, but 30% on those three things. So, and then you'd have multiple things that you could believe about the world. Multiple incompatible things. You believe them all to some degree. While some Bayesians are uncomfortable, blah, 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 any coherence theory of rational belief would appear to be at odds with uniqueness. For, however, we understood coherence, there will be multiple ways of achieving it that involve different attitudes to various propositions. Doubts about uniqueness may arise from reflection on persistent and widespread disagreement among apparently rational inquirers. According to Gideon Rosen, it should be obvious that reasonable people can disagree even when confronted with the same body of evidence. When a jury or a court is divided in a difficult case, the mere fact of disagreement does not mean that someone is being unreasonable. Note, and this has always been something I've been really sort of annoyed about, even as an undergrad. No one has any fucking clue what the term reasonable is. Everyone is reasonable in their own mind. No one else. It's how do you actually define rationality and reasonability across everyone when they don't all have the same epistemology? Now, if everyone's a Bayesian, you can do it, but not everyone's a Bayesian. Not everyone is a virtue epistemologist. And so each sort of epistemology will have its own standards of reasonability. But if you reject that, then there is no easy way to define what is reasonable. I got into a bad fight with the professor once because he said I was being unreasonable. I asked him to define reasonability, and when he couldn't do it, I was like, so what are you accusing me of? He was really annoyed. In a criminal trial, we have a large, complex body of evidence, some of which appears to link the defendant with the crime, some of which suggests that he had nothing to do with it. It's like people who think the law is objective when many things are reasonable and shit. Yeah. And this is the problem, because it's when you don't understand how complicated things are, to just sort of oversimplify, that's basically what happens, is everyone will be like, oh, this is what it means. Yes, that is what it means most of the time, except when things get hard, and then you have to realize it's not always like that. But yeah, radical. So, and that's how a lot of philosophy goes. Everything works 95% of the time, 98% of the time. Philosophy ends up having to deal with things 100% of the time, and so that last 5%, 3%, 2%, then you have to start doing weird shit to handle that. And it's these are the edge cases. Edge cases matter quite often, So, alright, figuring out what to believe is a matter of weighing various considerations as we try to fit all the pieces together. Difficult cases like this tend to produce sharp disagreement even among the most diligent inquirers. Natty says it's exactly like biology, the rules apply 95% but never 100, yeah. And that's what makes things difficult, because if you actually want a law of nature, it's not a law in the physical sense that it holds all the time, and even most physics doesn't hold all the time. It holds up into the degrees of applicability. If you go to the speed of light, things break down. So it's everything works up until the speed of light, but if you try to go faster than the speed of light, things start to break. And so it's even in physics, and it's not 100% of the time. So yeah. Alright, figuring out what to, so some may be tempted to give up and conclude that there is no telling who is right, but many of us retain our conviction that having earnestly wrestled with the evidence, our conclusions are correct. Yeah, but I mean, everyone always thinks they're right. My conclusion's right. Now, a proponent of uniqueness will have to insist that those who disagree have failed to respond to the evidence rationally. For if the parties in the dispute have the same evidence and one's total evidence uniquely determines what one can rationally believe, then they should all be in agreement. But this can be an awkward position to maintain. Why should I trust my own estimation of the probative force of the evidence when equally intelligent people judge it differently? Oh, I hate this shit. I don't always, this sort of thing starts to piss me off too. Just because they are smart doesn't mean their opinions are valid. Just because you're a smart person doesn't mean you know the same shit I do. What does it mean to be equally intelligent? That also doesn't mean anything. That's like saying equally rational when you don't have a definition of rationality. So equally intelligent doesn't mean anything, and nor does rational if you don't have a definition of intelligence or rationality. This sort of shit drives me crazy. Or is it that statistics is only correct 95% of the time? Yes, that's correct. That it's you are 90% you're correct 90% of the time and 100% of the time. Yeah. One initially appealing way to escape this worry is to join Rosen in insisting that those who disagree needn't display any failure of rationality. Yeah. Examples and motivations for permissivism can be multiplied. There are many important differences among permissive epistemologies. For instance, many permissive views will identify some other non-evidential factor which takes up the slack in fully determining what one should believe, and these extra factors will vary among different views. Differences such as these may crucially affect how a permissivist can best respond to the objections that I present. But in order to get out the basic worries that I have without too much fuss, I will ignore these distinctions and treat these permissive views as a generic position. I think there is much to be said for these and other challenges to uniqueness, but my purpose here will be to raise trouble for permissive views by displaying some difficulties we get into by denying uniqueness. Objections to extreme permissivism. Okay, so here's what we're doing. If you didn't get that, basically, if you don't have complete information of the world, then you're going to have multiple ways to interpret the world, and maybe you should be like, hey, multiple ways to interpret the world, any of those would be a good way to interpret the world. And so there would be multiple correct ways of interpreting the world, and that's permissive because it's not a unique way of interpreting the world given your evidence. Now, if this is going to be how most of life is, we do not have full evidence. We do not have full information most of the time. We don't. Okay. Objections to extreme permissivism. Let's begin by considering the following radical rejection of uniqueness. Extreme permissivism. There are possible cases in which you rationally believe P, yet is consistent with your being fully rational and possessing your current evidence that you believe not P instead. Okay, so you think, you believe it, but it's possible that it could be completely opposite. Author's main objection to extreme permissivism will take some work to develop. I will begin with a quick and dirty preliminary one. I'm on a jury with the task of deciding whether the defendant Smith is guilty. Prior to considering any evidence, it would be quite unreasonable to have any opinion as to Smith's guilt or innocence. Perhaps there are some... Yikes. Perhaps there are some propositions that one can rationally believe without evidence, but the guilt or innocence of a criminal defendant is not one of them. How could evaluation of the evidence render me rational in believing Smith is guilty if it is not reasonable to believe this already? Surely only if the total evidence supports Smith's guilt. And likewise, only evidence supporting his innocence could make it rational to believe that he is innocent. Evidence that has no bearing on whether Smith is guilty is no better than no evidence at all. But the evidence cannot support both Smith's innocence and his guilt. Whatever is evidence for P is evidence for the falsity of not P, and hence is evidence against not P. Of course, certain elements of or aspects of the total body of evidence might suggest that Smith is guilty, while others suggest the opposite. But it is incoherent to suppose that a whole body of evidence could count for both for and against a hypothesis. No, I don't think so, because what is a whole body of evidence here? The whole body of evidence could be reinterpreted in multiple ways, because whole body of evidence is not the entire state of the world. That's just the given evidence you have, and the given evidence you have, even if it's the whole body of it, may still be very suspect, may still be massively incomplete. So I don't know that this sentence makes any sense at all. I don't think this is rational. It is incoherent to suppose that a whole body of evidence could count both for and against the hypothesis. How complete is that whole body of evidence? That doesn't seem right at all. Alright, so then it is impossible that my examination of the evidence makes it rational for me to believe that Smith is guilty, but also rational to believe instead that he is innocent. And since neither view was rational apart from any evidence, the proposed radical departure from uniqueness cannot be right. I mean... me wank and me yawn. Yeah, I mean, this is some of the problem with epistemology. This is a lot of the problem with the epistemology, Brian. It's that they just spit this out, and it's like, no, I don't I don't believe that at all. And this completely just sort of like, I don't even think it's that hard to say. But then their conclusion is just fucked. Okay. All right, maybe not. Well, let's see what they say. Well, I think this is right. The argument above might seem a little too quick. The following considerations go into more depth. First, consider the following situation. Once again, prior to being presented with evidence, I haven't a clue whether Smith is guilty. But I have a couple of magical belief-inducing pills. Oh no. We're doing magical belief-inducing pills now. Okay. One, when swallowed, will give me a true belief on the matter. The other, a false belief. I have no idea which one is the truth pill. I think this is like 2005, so we didn't have truth pills yet. Yeah, those are important pills. So it is clearly irresponsible to take either, given that my purpose is to discern the truth. But I pick one at random and take it, finding myself with the conviction that Smith is guilty without being aware of any reason to think so. Now, perhaps we can rationally retain beliefs after we've lost track of the reasons that led us first to hold on to them. Yeah, I mean, that happens all the time. I believe stuff and I don't remember what my reasoning was, but then I end up believing it. Yeah, exactly, Radical. So, so this is 2005. So this is after the Matrix. So yeah, this person could be red pill, blue pilled. But in this case, I can recall that my belief was not based on evidence pointing to Smith's guilt, but is rather the result of an arbitrarily chosen pill. There was also, what was it called? Yes Man with Jim Carrey, and where he would say yes to everything. And so you couldn't tell if he was being honest or just had to say yes because of like some magical situation. And so I believe it was, I forget what her name was. But yeah, liar. Yeah. All that red, blue, black pill bullshit. Yeah. But I mean, this is before the social commentary, red, blue, black pill, blue pill stuff. Yeah, but I forget who it was. But like, there was a female love interest, and she started to realize that she couldn't tell when he was being honest or not, because when he said yes, she thought like sometimes it was because he couldn't say no, and other times because he really meant it. Yeah. I always liked the other sister. There were two of them that were actors. My brother liked her. Was Mara Tierney? No, it was the other one was I think acting in Bones, the TV show. I thought it was somebody else. Maybe I'm wrong. Yeah, but it wasn't Mara Tierney. That's not who I had in mind, but I could easily be wrong. Yeah, I don't know. I'm sorry if I'm wrong. Now I want to look it up. Yeah, so it wasn't this movie. This is not the right movie. Maybe I got it wrong. Yes Man? Yeah, Zoe Deschanel. The movie was, Yes Man, this one. Yep. This is the one I was thinking about. I always liked Emily Deschanel better. My brother liked Zoe. I always thought that was funny. There's a split between us on that. Yep. Okay, but that's the point, is that what are you actually trying to gain out of this sort of like, oh, I took this pill and the fact that you can't tell what you actually believe if you can remember that you had a belief for a dumb reason, which is like taking a pill. Okay. So it's the result of an arbitrarily chosen pill. If I am rational, recognition of this fact should surely undermine my conviction in Smith's guilt. Prior to taking the pill, my credence that I would soon hold a true belief should have been about half. I cannot coherently maintain a conviction that Smith is guilty while being entirely uncertain as to whether my belief that Smith is guilty is true. And it would be perverse to reason backwards as follows. Even though I had only a 50-50 chance of taking the truth pill, since I have formed the belief that Smith is guilty, and indeed he is guilty, now I see that I must have gotten lucky in choosing the right pill. If it is not already obvious enough that this would be absurd, imagine the following. It is obvious. Unreal says, I liked Emily Deschanel, but I couldn't stand Bones because the whole other thing was just when she was going to fall in love with her idiot partner. Yeah, well, that was always that's the problem with a lot of those shows. But yeah. But that does not change the fact that I liked Emily more than Zoe. Okay. I take lots of these pills, arbitrarily forming hundreds of beliefs on matters about which I had no clue beforehand. If I retain the resulting beliefs, then I'll have to conclude that by some extraordinary coincidence I managed to pick a truth pill each time, and if this were reasonable, then it should make no difference if the pills were selected from a collection of 99% of which were falsity pills. Surely, instead, the only reasonable response to reflection on my pill popping is to slip back into agnosticism about Smith's guilt. Yeah, so if you're taking things that change your mind for no good reason, you should not be trusting your intuitions at that point, because it's literally just pill-induced or drug-induced. Now, let's suppose instead that I have not taken a pill, but under the influence of a permissive epistemologist, I come to believe that extreme permissivism applies to the matter of Smith's guilt, given the available evidence. That is, I believe that upon considering the evidence in court, one could rationally conclude that Smith is guilty, but there's an alternative path that one's reason could take, arriving instead at the rational conclusion that he is innocent. Supposing this is so, is there any advantage from the point of view of pursuing the truth in carefully weighing the evidence to draw a conclusion, rather than just taking a belief-inducing pill? Surely I have no better chance of forming a true belief either way. If my permissive assumption is correct, careful weighing the evidence in an impeccably rational manner will not determine what I end up believing. Alright, I'm misunderstanding something here, I think. For by hypothesis, the evidence does not determine a unique rational conclusion. Yeah, so what is is extreme permissiveness saying? Is extreme permissiveness saying you will always have an alternate solution that is just as good? Is that what it said earlier? I didn't think that's what it said. Well, let me finish this paragraph and I'll go back up and look. So whatever I do end up believing upon a rational deliberation will depend, if not on blind chance, on some arbitrary factor having no bearing on the matter in question. Is that really what was said? No. There are possible cases in which you rationally believe P, yet is consistent with your being fully rational and possessing your current evidence that you believe not P. Alright, so I guess they're trying to say that you believe one, but you could also believe the other, but you just randomly chose one. Okay, I think I didn't understand this the first time. But of course, there are possible cases where the evidence does not support either outcome. In this case, they're trying to say where you believe P, but you have no good reason for choosing that over another one. That's fair. It's like, well, then you should really be in the agnostic camp. Okay, fine. But again, what got said in this whole area, that was by definition. You know, if you're saying you should be agnostic, but then should you just pick one side, no one would say, yes, you should just pick one side. They took a very long time to say something that was just like by definition. Eesh. Epistemology. I mean, this isn't terrible stuff. It's just epistemology. It might be suggested that rationally evaluating the evidence is a fairly reliable means of coming to the correct conclusion as to whether P. Why? That is entirely up to the evidence. It has nothing to do with your rational faculties if the evidence isn't up to the task of proving it one way or the other. So it might be suggested, but why would anyone say that? Okay. Even if that evidence does not determine a particular conclusion as rational, then definitely you wouldn't say that. Epistemol is a hard pill to swallow. Yes, it is. But it's very hard. Okay, so they agree. Okay, they were setting us up. I'm sorry. But it is very hard to see how it could. Of course, often one's total evidence does favor a conclusion of P over not P, and its doing so is a fairly reliable guide to the truth. Evidence can be misleading, that is, point us to the wrong conclusion, but this is not common. Again, how do you know that? How do you know that the evidence leads always to the truth? Okay, so there is no problem in this sort of non-permissive case in seeing how rational assessment of evidence is a reliable means to truth. Quite often we're right. Quite often we're wrong. I mean, it feels a little cherry picking at this point, what they're saying. But they're trying to say, look, if it's even Steven in terms of evidence, then you shouldn't pick a side. If there is evidence that you think is right, then you pick that side. Okay. I mean, I'm okay with that, but I don't love how they're going about this. The probative force of the evidence is a reliable guide to the truth, and a rational inquirer is sensitive to this force, forming his beliefs accordingly. But in any case in which the evidence does favor one conclusion over another, it is not equally rational to draw either conclusion. A rational person, when confronted with evidence favoring P, does not believe not P. So a case, if there could be such, in which a rational person can believe P or believe not P instead, must be one in which the evidence favors neither conclusion. Yeah, I mean, this is a definition. They should have just said this at the start. They didn't need to argue for this. They just needed to be defined. Okay. Even if it is granted that a rational person needn't suspend judgment in such a situation, just how rational evaluation of the evidence could reliably lead us to the truth in such a case is entirely mysterious. Sounds like something you take for intellectual constipation. God, I wish there was a pill I could give people for intellectual constipation. That would be great. A lot of times it's alcohol, but like not always. It would have to be by virtue of some property of the evidence whose reliable link to the truth is inaccessible to the inquirer. For if an inquirer is aware that the evidence has a feature F, which is reliably linked to the truth of P, then surely it would be unreasonable to believe not P. Yeah, so it's like, okay, the defendant's fingerprints were on the gun, and there was like gunpowder residue on their hands, and like it was on all of them. So it's like, did they fire the gun? That would seem like that would be evidence that they at least fired the gun. Okay, it is hard to imagine what such a truth-conductive feature could be, let alone how it could act on an inquirer's mind, directing him to the truth. Furthermore, it is not enough for forming beliefs in response to evidence to have a rational advantage over pill popping, that it just so happens that the former is a reliable route to the truth without the inquirer recognizing this. For all I can tell, the truth pill might be a little stickier, so that the random fetching one from the bag and taking it will usually yield a true belief. But for all I can tell, it might be quite the opposite. I might have a tendency to pick the falsity pill. This is such a silly argument. It's like, okay, do you understand things in the world? Yes or no? But you might also be wrong sometimes. No shit, Sherlock. Only if I could reasonably suppose the arbitrarily selecting a pill will most likely lead to truth would this be a way to form beliefs that can rationally survive recognition of having been formed in this way. We certainly have no reason to expect that a rational assessment of the evidence leads to the truth in a way that is inaccessible to an inquirer, even if we allow for this as a possibility. Yeah, so again, you have to think that you are semi-smart and get things right some of the time, and you know when. Okay. So forming beliefs in response to evidence that does not determine a rational conclusion seems no better than taking pill-inducing beliefs. Shocking. Perhaps the following will drive home the point further. No, you don't need to drive home the point further. We got the fucking point the first 3 times. I'm sorry. Epistemology gets on my nerves. I might examine all the evidence without drawing a conclusion as to whether Smith is guilty, but I do draw the epistemological conclusion that either verdict could be rationally held given this evidence. Perhaps if I were to judge that a particular verdict was rationally obligatory, I couldn't help but draw that conclusion. But as the evidence doesn't strike me as pointing clearly in one direction, if it did, I couldn't judge it to be equally rational to believe the opposite. I am psychologically capable of suspending judgment. But if I really do judge that believing P in this situation would be rational as would believing not P, then there should be nothing wrong with my bringing it about that I have some belief or another on the matter. But then it surely cannot matter how I go about choosing which belief to hold, whether by choosing a belief that I'd like to hold or flipping a coin or whatever. Yeah. So if you can just make shit up, then you can just make shit up. I got you, author. Now, the author has argued that reflection on my having taken a pill to believe that Smith is guilty should undermine all my conviction on the matter. Yeah, I mean, if you get hit on the head and then someone asks you, are you feeling okay? And you'd be like, no, but I believe this. You'd be like, well, you don't feel well, man. So it's like, no shit. So likewise, if I have concluded on the basis of the evidence that Smith is guilty, my conviction should be undermined if I really think that a belief in Smith's innocence is also rationally permissible in light of this evidence. For if I believe this, then I should judge myself no more likely to have arrived at the truth than a random pill popper. So we have reached the conclusion that I cannot rationally accept the extreme permissivist thesis with respect to one of my own beliefs. That is, believing P is not rationally compatible with believing that one could just as rationally have believed not P, given the same evidence. Yes. So if you think the evidence is going to be determinate, but you have to assume that, I didn't get that above, then of course you have to say, well, I'm going to believe what the evidence says. That's rational. Fine. But they took a long and painful time to say it. To be careful, we should note that there are some logical loopholes available to the permissivist here, even granting my argument thus far. For instance, I might maintain that it is rationally permissible for you either to believe P or not believe P, given your evidence, but deny that the same liberal standards apply to me. But this would be obviously ad hoc and unmotivated. No, why would that be ad hoc and unmotivated? We might not have the same background knowledge. And if you got different background knowledge, you might interpret the stuff differently. Different background knowledge matters. And so how is that ad hoc and unmotivated? That seems very normal that people have different experiences and see the world differently. Okay, author says, it is hard to imagine any reason I could have to accept a permissivist view of rationality that exempts myself. Yeah, for yourself, that's fine, but someone else. They just said that. Alright. Now, I guess do they mean that, like, everyone, if you allowed someone else to reason this way, would they say that about themselves? Then no, but again, this is really a by definition thing. They're saying if you are by definition should be rationally taking one answer over another, then of course everyone would have to answer the same. But if you're saying for someone else that you don't know, could they reason differently? Yes, but should they be extreme permissivists? No. Okay. But again, weird. Another move would be to suggest that extreme permissivism is true but epistemically destructive if known. In some cases, one can rationally believe P or believe not P given one's evidence, but only as long as one mistakenly thinks that one's current attitude to P is rationally obligatory given one's evidence. This strikes me as an odd position, for it seems natural to suppose that a belief can always rationally survive learning the epistemic value of one's evidence. That is, if it is rational to believe P given evidence E, then it is rational to believe P given E and E prime, where E prime correctly states what attitude to P are rationally permissible given E. Yeah, so the idea is that if you know more about like your meta process, you should still have the same beliefs. That's okay. Yeah. But in any event, this position makes it very difficult for us to rationally believe extreme permissivism, for the knowledge that it applies in a particular case is self-undermining. By the arguments above, if I believe that both a belief in P and a belief in not P are each rationally permitted by my evidence, then I should conclude that neither belief is rationally permissible. Hence, if I am to believe anything, then for each belief I should hold that it is the only rational attitude that I can take given my evidence. Furthermore, if extreme permissivism were plausible with respect to many matters, then surely it could plausibly be applied to itself. That is, extreme permissivists should hold that the usual evidence available to philosophers does not determine whether one should believe or disbelieve extreme permissivism. Well, they said some beliefs. They didn't say all beliefs could be suffer from extreme permissivism. So I'm not entirely sure that it does actually apply to extreme permissivism. Extreme permissivism said sometimes you can like choose, like even if you have evidence for P and against it, you can choose one or the other. But like they didn't say all beliefs are this way. But yeah. After all, the plenty of apparent reasonable people deny extreme permissivism, but then by the arguments above, extreme permissivism cannot rationally be believed on our evidence. Maybe, author. Maybe. This still seems to leave room for a coherent permissive permission. Yeah, you don't have to be extreme. That's fine. Call a case in which my evidence rationally permits me to believe P or to believe not P a permissive case. Yeah, so we're not going to be extreme. You cannot, like, just because you have evidence that, like, that's completely equal. You have, like, some evidence for this one, some evidence for that one. We could maintain that there are possible and even actual permissive cases, but that these are very rare and one cannot tell for any case that it is a permissive one. So my attitude with regard to each case considered individually should be that it is not permissive, while I may maintain that some rare cases are permissive. There is an obvious parallel here with the so-called preface paradox, where I believe regarding each of my beliefs individually that it is true, while maintaining that at least some of my beliefs are false. Yeah. But while this position may be coherent and escape the objections thus far, I doubt that anyone holds such a view, as it's hard to see what can motivate it. Typical permissive epistemology, such as subjective Bayesianism, entail that permissive cases are quite pervasive and hence cannot easily avoid the problems I have raised. I mean, if you have a 50-50 case where you're trying to say, look, I don't know which one this is, to P or not to P? That is the question. Yeah. Well, it's to believe P or not to P. But yeah. You're gonna say, well, look, if something's like they're exactly equal or exactly 30%, then it's like, all right, yeah, sure. But of course, in reality, we don't have exact numbers placed on all this stuff. So the question is it matter that it's kind of hazy in the real world? And they're saying, well, you should still be leaning a little bit more one way or the other. That's what got said here. Like, it's the Kill Bill situation. Do you feel relieved, or what was the question? Question is, do I feel relieved or regret that you didn't have to fight the bride in Kill Bill? And she said, well, I feel a little bit of both. Bullshit. Of course you feel a little bit of both. I'm asking which you feel more. That's the question here. It's like, okay, what do you believe a little bit more versus a little bit there? And the question is then, well, do you actually know? You just feel a little bit one way or the other. And that's what they're saying here. But like, maybe that is so small that it doesn't really matter. And they're trying to say, well, we're going to like sort of like, that doesn't count. They're saying right here. I'm not so sure that like, okay, that's only when you are really hitting like very specific numbers. Be like, well, you can always be a little bit more, a little bit less. I'm not sure if people are this simplistic. Like, are people that simplistic? I don't know. Yeah, that's true, Unreal Brian. It's like, do I have to get up and go to the bathroom? It's terrible. That is one of the, that's one of those very common things that's happened to everybody, and everyone's just got to be like, oh God, this sucks. Retheus, what's up? Yeah, worst battle. All right. So the very like high degree of specificity here that say you're always going to believe one side more than the other for whatever it is. It's like, I'm not 100%. It's always better to just get up and do it. I will take your word for it. I don't know if I've have an opinion on that. Old people wisdom. Well, there we go. Yeah. Yep. Well, the extreme permissivism, I'm not so sure. Yeah. Okay, yeah, but you don't really want to say that you pick one just to pick one. Like, you just pick your beliefs. That's true. We don't just pick our beliefs. We always have some sort of, like, if you have a belief, you didn't just pick it. You have some reason for it. That's what got said in that first section. Don't you guys use a wet vacuum? Yeah. We're all reaching that old person point soon. Getting there, all of us. Okay, alternative permissible standards. Here's an objection that one might make to the main argument that I've put forth. A crucial step in their case was that the claim that if you believe P but maintain that you could have rationally believed not P on the same evidence, then you should take the means by which you arrived at your belief P to be no better than arbitrarily popping a belief-inducing pill. This might be a point of resistance for a permissivist. He might insist that he has come to his conviction P by means that are very conducive to forming true beliefs, namely by assessing the evidence according to the appropriate epistemic standards. This is not at all like randomly popping a belief-inducing pill. He might claim that such standards are not permissive ones presenting subjects with an alternative option for belief, but rather that they state uniquely what is to be believed given certain evidence. Yeah, so you have reasons to believe stuff. It's not just randomly choosing one or the other. Even before assessing the evidence, if someone accepts such standards of evidence assessment, then he should judge it very likely that he will arrive at the truth by their application. For the standards will sanction only those beliefs that, according to the standards, are well supported by the evidence and hence likely to be true. So far, this doesn't seem like a permissive position, for given his acceptance of standards that sanction only a belief in P given of his evidence, then he shouldn't just believe not P instead. However, the permissivist that I'm imagining might maintain that he could have adopted different set of standards that sanction very different attitudes given the same evidence. This possibility, he might suggest, is consistent with his being fully rational and possessing his current evidence, and were he to accept the standards of sanctioning a belief in not P, he would be rational in doing so. Yeah, so this is what I was saying earlier, that someone else could have different standards of understanding things, and they could be just as smart as you, they just do things in different ways. And so, given special circumstances, you guys could diverge. You two could diverge in what you believe. Yeah. Okay. In this way, the subtle permissivist tries to have his cake and eat it too. On the one hand, he can proudly maintain that he is respectively forming beliefs in a manner that he takes to be reliable in attaining truth. On the other hand, he denies that he is bound by rationality to form just his current opinions on his evidence. Likewise, he needn't accuse those who share his evidence but differ in their conclusions of any irrationality, provided their views are in accord with their own alternative epistemic standards. Yeah, so what counts? Is there only one standard of truth, of epistemic standard? That, like, there's only one way to, like, know the truth. Maybe there's more than one way and they diverge at certain times. And that, in that case, what should you do? All right. Author thinks we ought to be suspicious of this position for similar reasons as before. First, note that if our permissivist takes his own standards to be a reliable guide to truth, then since the alternative standards deliver very different conclusions, he must judge them to be rather unreliable. So he should judge himself very lucky to have adopted conducive standards, since with full rationality he could have followed ones that would lead him wildly into error. This is not very humble here. He really thinks that everyone really thinks that they know best. Like, really? Do you? Are you sure that, like, everything you do is, like, rational, gets you to the truth? Not entirely sure about that. You have to also define smart. Yeah, this is a lot of sort of like, okay, if you take this person's word for intelligent, smart, and all that sort of, and rational, it's like, sure, but this is very, in some sense, single-minded, like first person. Yeah, if you are reflecting on yourself, you really can't say, well, of course I don't know. I think what I think is what I believe, and I think it's good. But when it comes into like the social sphere, and that's what they're trying to do here, it doesn't seem like that might hold as easily. Yeah. We see here that we see here that the same worries about arbitrariness just arise at a different position. How have I come to hold the epistemic standards which lead me from my evidence to conclude that P, according to this permissivist, it was not by virtue of being rational, since it is consistent with my being rational that I adhere to rather different standards that would have me believe not P instead. I remember an old story from Philosophy of Science. Everyone seemed to love, for a very long time, the idea of experiments falsifying, theories. And there was a story about, people being like a Western philosopher, and he was talking to like a Middle Eastern colleague. So this was a philosopher, but that grew up in a different philosophical tradition. They were out of the Middle East somewhere, an Arabian of some sort. And they were saying, oh no, like falsification is like how you know what science is. And the colleague was like, no, that's not going to work. And they were like, no, like this is great. And the colleague was just like, no, and he tried to explain it, but like, falsification still has a position here in like Western science, and like the idea that like we falsify stuff. Given like the last 40 years, Western philosophy of science has moved away from falsification because there's too many problems with it, ways around it. And it's like, the guy was recalling the arguments that his Middle Eastern colleague had made to him, and it's like they understood this, but like a long time ago, because their tradition understood that there are problems with falsification. So whatever that was. But like, this is one of these things, is like, you are so focused on your theory, it's like blinders sometimes. It doesn't always work that way. But it's like, this is like, how could I assume I could be wrong, but like someone else could be like, have a different way of thinking about things? People think differently about stuff because they have severely different cultures, severely different perspectives on stuff, and that you have to take that kind of seriously. I don't think this author is taking this as seriously as they might at this point. At least not as much as I would like. Okay. They continue. But then it seems that my applying the correct standards and hence arriving at the right conclusion is just a matter of dumb luck, much like popping a pill. Yeah, sometimes it is. And hence I ought to doubt that I really have been lucky enough to do so. We're not that smart. Like, people are not that smart. We only have to get stuff right in aggregate enough that we all don't die. But that's not a very high bar to get over, and it's definitely not enough for us to say we know the truth in any particular instance. Good thing I'm not in Florida, so I'd be put into a woke jail. Yeah, well, I'm not. I'm in New York. But NASA isn't taking contamination seriously enough. Yeah, so... yeah. Alright, to make this situation more vivid, let's fill in the details with a make-believe story about how we come to adhere to certain epistemic standards. Suppose it's just a matter of education. Okay. I follow Standards S because I was inculcated with them at MIT. But had I attended Berkeley, I would have been inculcated with Standards S Prime instead. You see, this is what I mean. These are really, really... like, this is not... they don't understand the significance of like cultural differences here. They're talking about like two Western schools in the United States. Like, you're talking about this, even though they may have different standards, this is not a significant difference. Now, if you were to say, look, you were educated in like, 14th century Baghdad or whenever the the Islamic Renaissance was, where they were the height of civilization, and then you were educated in England at the same time. And it's like, well, okay, now we're talking significant differences, but both thought they were right. Now, if you're talking MIT and Berkeley today, that's very different than saying like, okay, when like Arabia was the king of science and then like England was jack shit, it wouldn't seem so obvious that like they were going to be different. NYC isn't real because a fictional setting for a TV show. Sadly, a lot of NYC is made up on TV. One of the things that always gets me is when they blow up the Empire State Building. A lot of people blow up the Empire State Building. So if you remember in Independence Day when they blow up the Empire State Building, they have this great straight-on shot of the Empire State Building to see it blowing up. And someone commented to me once or online that there's no way to look at the Empire State Building because it takes up a full block. You can only look at it like at an angle. There is no way to get the shot of it straight on like it was there. So it's like, sorry. But like, yeah, a lot of NYC is kind of this sort of manufactured thing you see on TV. So you can't actually look at the Empire State Building in the way that it was blown up. So yeah. Okay, so we're talking MIT and Berkeley. So given my total evidence as input S and S prime deliver conclusions P and not P respectively. The story may be far-fetched, but nothing hinges on details, and if my being rational is compatible with adopting either set of standards, then there is some further factor which led me to hold S rather than S prime. Now I can imagine myself in a counterfactual situation before graduate school where my sole motive for study is to answer the question of whether P. I have all the available relevant evidence. How the fuck do you know what the relevant evidence is at the beginning? I'm just not sure what yet to make of it. Fake news. Now, I learned that if I attend MIT, I will inevitably inherit Standards S from my mentors, which will give me the evidence, will lead me to believe P. This happens all the time, where people go to school because they want to argue something, and so they be like, that person will help me do this. This is a thing people do. So, I mean, they're saying this is like sort of a fanciful thing. And this is not crazy. It is a good example, actually. Attending Berkeley will result in my adhering to Standards S prime and hence arriving at the conclusion not P. Now, surely the prospect of several years of graduate school will seem rather pointless no matter how passionately curious I am as to whether P. Indeed, my prospects for answering P to my satisfaction should seem dim. I might as well choose a grad school to attend and hence opinions to hold by a preference for Massachusetts weather or by flipping a coin. Why would you ever want Massachusetts weather over Berkeley? But maybe that's what they're joking. Once I have filled out the enrollment forms for MIT, say, I will know that unless something gets in the way, in a few years I will be of the opinion that P. See, again, they're assuming that they know everything now, but that's weird. If I am a permissivist, I should take it that I will soon rationally believe P. If this is so, why shouldn't I just believe it now and save myself the time and trouble? Yeah. Well, they might think that they have faith now, but in the future that it will be more rationally defensible. But see, now we can split hairs because they're splitting hairs. But like you could say, look, I have faith that the earth is 6,000 years old and I want to go to a school that will help me prove that the earth is 6,000 years old. So in like a few years after going to like one of those religious places, I'll be able to prove it rationally that the earth was 6,000 years old. And so there's a difference between believing something and then being able to like argue for it. So, yeah. But of course it would be absurd to form an opinion on the matter by an arbitrary choice when I don't even know what to make of the evidence. If this is the sorry state I find myself in with respect to answering whether P before I begin my inquiry, then I should judge myself no better than off than having arrived at a conclusion if I judge that my adoption of epistemic standards was such an arbitrary matter. Yeah, so if you were already started out with an answer, fine. But yeah. Okay. So moderate permissivism and practical deliberation. I've been considering an extreme rejection of uniqueness that might appeal only to the most permissive epistemologists. Yeah, so again, if you're saying even given evidence that defines that you should choose something, you can choose the other thing, it's a weird position. Okay, we can back off from this level of permissiveness without going all the way to uniqueness. Many will find it easier to accept that rationality allows for a more restricted range of differences of opinion. Perhaps there are cases in which a reasonable assessment of the evidence rules out a belief that not P, but does not indicate whether one should believe that P or suspend judgment. Or more cautiously still, that there may at least be some leeway in the degree of conviction that is rationally permissible given one's evidence. These moderately permissive positions still run into trouble. Suppose that having carefully considered the evidence, my conviction in Smith's guilt is so strong enough to warrant voting guilty. Surely this is what I should do. To let him go free, given that I am rationally confident that he's guilty, would be grossly irresponsible. If I had more substantial doubts, it would be appropriate to vote not guilty, even if I strongly suspected that he was guilty. Now let's try to suppose that the range of rationally permissible degrees of confidence in Smith's guilt is just broad enough to include my own conviction as well as a degree of doubt that would make a vote of not guilty appropriate. It appears that if this were so, I should have no qualms about letting Smith go free, even though I'm sure he's a murderer. See, this is weird. They're saying, look, we know it, but we're just not sure, and therefore you're going to feel bad. Yeah, people feel bad, but it's not provable to the right standards. So you may be sure of it, but it's not provable. Yeah, you're going to feel bad, but did you do the legal thing, or did you vote with your heart? And so I feel like this is a little bit conflating two different concepts right here. Alright. For suppose that before considering the evidence I am persuaded that there is this range of rationally permissible degrees of conviction. If I'm correct in really thinking this, then there should be nothing wrong with arbitrarily choosing a verdict without bothering to look at the evidence. Okay, because you think there's a range. I don't know, the range would have to be dependent on the evidence, you know? So I'm not entirely sure that, they're saying, okay, you just think there's going to be a range, and so you can pick whichever one. But, that's a little bit weird. If there are a few different possible outcomes, and you're not sure which one of them it is, you would be legally required to pick the not guilty verdict, because that's how the law works. But, yeah. I think it's statistics, 1 in 9 people on death row have been exonerated. Yeah, we're not very good at, death row stuff here in the United States. I think that's for a United States statistic. So again, this is one of the arguments against the death row stuff, is that the percentages of innocent people, or at least people who should not be on death row, is massively too high for the amount of people that have been killed. So yeah, so again, I think they're trying to force everyone into this, well, you believe something, you should go with what you believe most. But again, I think it really depends, if you actually believe what exactly the ranges that you believe and what the standards of judgment are here. Okay, if I am correct, I'm looking at for there should be nothing wrong with my arbitrarily choosing a degree of conviction, induced perhaps by a magic pill. What if it's induced by the evidence that there's a degree that you're not entirely sure about, and then you have, okay, 3 you're sure he's guilty and 1 that one non-guilty, but you can't tell the difference there. Then you don't know. You may be very overwhelmingly convinced of the guilt, but the problem is that's not the legal standard, what you're convinced of. If there's one way that he could have gotten out and it wasn't proved that he did it, then usually it's if the glove don't fit, you must acquit. There's a way out, and that's what happens. Alright. Given such a degree of conviction, I should vote accordingly, whatever it is. I can do no better by examining the evidence, forming a view, and voting in accordance with it. To suppose otherwise involves denying the permissive view. For assuming that rationality and evidence do not determine a unique degree of conviction, then even if I am perfectly rational, there is no predicting what my degree of conviction will be upon evaluating the evidence, and hence there is no predicting how I will vote, whether Smith is guilty or not. Justice is no more likely to be done given that I examine the evidence than if I just vote however I like. Yeah, so they're just saying, look, don't you feel one way more over the other? Yeah. But like, okay, I got that, but it feels just like you're unique. The uniqueness is how you feel about things. That may not be how there are other standards in how you feel about stuff. Like the feeling about the guilt is not the same as the standards of rationality in a legal sense or across epistemologies. Again, like I was saying earlier, epistemologies can be radically different, and I don't think this person understands that, or at least not to the degree that I appreciate it. And then there's different standards of rationality in like legal systems. So like you've got like criminal defenses and then civil defenses. So in criminal stuff you have to be like beyond reasonable doubt. In civil it's not that strict, and so it's like there are different standards going on here. How you feel doesn't matter. It's did they prove it to a certain standard? And I feel like this person saying, well, you always feel like one more or the other. Well, so what? That's not the standard here. Okay. Author continues. Now, if this is an appropriate way to proceed before considering the evidence, then I can reason similarly once I have viewed it and have become convinced that Smith is guilty. Facts don't care about feelings. No, they don't, but truth is very slippery. Truth is very slippery, MDD. So, when I was in undergrad, they were rewriting the school charter. And the head of the school was this Kantian philosopher. He was an asshole. And he sat down, he got his buddies, because he was a Kantian philosopher, he got his buddies in, hey, Rencoin, what's up? He got his buddies in the philosophy department and the political science department. And they sat around, we're going to write up a manifesto for like what the school should like be. And so it was political scientists and philosophers in like political philosophers in that room, and they're writing it up. And he was the chancellor, and the vice chancellor was somebody from a different department, like I don't know, chemist or sociologist. I don't know, not a sociologist. It was like a scientist of some sort. And the scientist kept saying, well, we have to put truth in the charter for the school. And he just kept getting like, like stop, like we'll get to that. We'll get to that. The McKean's Beauty Contest and Consistetics. There you go. Sounds nice things to think about. So and this guy kept saying, no, we need to put truth is part of what the school is about. And guy got kind of annoyed that he kept getting ignored or getting like punted off to the side, and eventually got angry. And the chancellor had to stop and say, look, no one knows actually what the truth is. And we have no way to define it. And it's the first thing that gets abused. If you ever write truth into the Constitution, that's the line that gets abused, that people start doing horrible things and like bullshit things because they know no one can prove them wrong. And so you don't actually put truth into charters or constitutions, because then that is a easy way out for scumbags. And so it's like, facts don't care about feelings, but like, then again, they can be abused. Like, truth can be abused. And so it's like, people like to think that the truth is, held up there, but that's not how it is in practice. Okay. Anyway, if this is an appropriate way to proceed before considering the evidence, then I can reason similarly once I've viewed it and have become convinced that Smith is guilty. Given the same evidence, I could no less rationally have significant doubts about Smith's guilt, given which I could responsibly vote not guilty. That I happen to lack these doubts is either a result of chance or some arbitrary causal factor. Yeah, dude, we don't know the truth, motherfucker. You just think you're getting it right. The inhumility here, the unhumbleness. But yeah, so I'd be doing no better with respect to the goal of securing a just verdict by voting with my convictions. For what ultimately matters for justice is the correspondence between the verdict and whether Smith is guilty. See, this is false. This is just false. For what ultimately matters for justice is the correspondence between the verdict and when Smith is guilty. No, the guilt is a legal term. It like justice, like we don't deal with justice. You are not doing justice in the legal system. You're doing the legal system in the legal system. And that's what's getting real hazy here. University of Michigan motto: art, science, truth. Yeah. But like these are how it goes, Unreal Brian. It's like these are old things that like goes in the motto. But I wonder if that's in like the school constitution or charter anymore. Because, you know, that's gonna like this is what happens. So if you are going to get political scientists and you're gonna get philosophers that know their history and how these things work, it's like you don't say that anymore. You say something else. But yeah. Okay. What I happen to believe or how strongly I believe it makes no difference to the justice of the verdict. My rationally forming an opinion in the light of the evidence is just the means by which I try to attain a just outcome. Quare verum here. What's a quare verum? I don't know what that is. Sorry. Yeah. But yeah. But however good I am at assessing the probative force of the evidence, it is entirely open whether my degree of rational conviction will fall within guilty or not guilty range. As long as my vote corresponds to an attitude that was within the bounds of rationally permissible conviction, I have done as well as I possibly can, given the available evidence to attain a just verdict. So although I'm sure that Smith is guilty, I'll vote not guilty just because I happen to like the guy. Yeah, so if you're going to give yourself range, you can believe stuff a little bit because you don't know, then it's like you happen to like the guy. You know, yeah. But again, you might be voting because you're not 100% sure of your own convictions. And so that's the thing. You say, I'm pretty sure he's guilty, but I'm not 100% sure. So it's like there is still doubt. But then they're saying, well, no, there is no doubt. And this author's trying to define themselves out of the problem here. Now, Michigan State's current motto is Spartan's will. Pretty pathetic, but no truth there. Yeah. So how do you like that? You know? How current is that motto too? Okay. So, but of course it can't be right to try to let someone go free when you are rationally persuaded that he is a murderer. Perhaps it is obligatory to vote not guilty if I know that one might have rational doubts about Smith's guilt. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. For any evidence that it is rational to have doubts may itself cast enough doubt on Smith's guilt to make a guilty vote inappropriate, but in this case I should not retain my conviction that he is guilty. See, this is them trying to define themselves out of the problem. When you feel that you are rationally allowed to say guilty, you should not say otherwise. But when you don't believe that, then you shouldn't. But like they're trying to force a Manichaean situation here. Holding this moderately permissive view either leads to the absurd consequence that it is appropriate to vote against one's convictions, or it is self-undermining. Yeah. Here's a related worry. Instead of immediately inducing a degree of conviction, a magic pill... Oh god, the magic pill stories again. A magic pill might ensure that I rationally respond to the evidence to arrive at that conviction. We are supposing for the sake of argument that there is a certain range of rationally permissible degrees of confidence in Smith's guilt given the evidence. So among the possible worlds in which I respond to the same evidence in a perfectly rational manner, there is some in which I'm sure he's guilty and others in which I have doubts. The pill simply ensures that one of the latter worlds obtains. Taking such a pill at random is not essentially different from evaluating the evidence without it. In either case, some factor other than the evidence or my ability to rationally respond to it causes me to form a degree of conviction. Why not take charge of these arbitrarily influencing factors as I choose? But since which pill I take determines how sure I will be, which in turn will determine how I vote, taking a pill is tantamount to arbitrarily choosing how to vote with no evidence at all, but this cannot be the right thing to do. Again, if you define it that you are going to feel one way more than the other, then yes, I agree. You feel one way more than the other. But that's the whole point, is that they're saying, all right, you always have to feel one way more than the other. And if you don't, then you don't. But again, what was said here then? All right, responsiveness to new evidence. A rational person is responsive to new evidence. My confidence in a proposition given certain evidence should depend partly on my confidence prior to obtaining this evidence and partly on the strength of the evidence. The problem I want to raise is that to the extent that we reject uniqueness, it is hard to see why one's convictions ought always to be responsive to confirming evidence. Suppose that you and I share a total evidence E. My subjective probability for P is X and yours is lower at Y. We now obtain additional evidence E prime which supports P. My confidence in P rises to X prime and yours to Y prime, which happens to be equal to the value of X that I held prior to obtaining E prime. We have each updated our convictions appropriately in response to the new evidence. But now let's suppose that we're each fully rational in holding our different degrees of belief X and Y given just evidence E. Although I've been a little bit more confident than you, I would have been no less rational in sharing your doubts. Why then shouldn't I just keep my confidence P at X if it suits me? After all, that is where I would have ended up if I had enjoyed your lower degree of confidence prior to obtaining E prime. If that degree of doubt would have been rational for me back then, what could be wrong with correspondingly lower credence now? Perhaps in between obtaining E and E prime and responding to it, I take one of those pills, shifting my confidence down to yours at Y. Then, recognizing the significance of E prime, my confidence rises appropriately to X. There should be nothing wrong with taking such a pill, given that the resulting conviction is no less rational. But the net effect is that I remain entirely unmoved by E prime, even though I correctly recognize that it confirms P. This can't be right. Imagine a juror who is on the fence, undecided as to whether Smith is guilty. He receives new evidence and correctly recognizes that it confirms Smith's guilt. But our juror remains unmoved, not the slightest bit more inclined towards guilty verdict. Such a person is not epistemically competent to serve on a jury. Yeah, again, if you get evidence that by definition should make you rationally decide something, you should do that. Cool. Okay. Rationality and first-person deliberation. The arguments of section 4 and 5 suggest that a permissive account of rationality introduces a kind of arbitrariness to our beliefs that can infect both practical and theoretical deliberations. We can roughly pose the general challenge in terms of outright belief as follows. If my current beliefs are not rationally obligatory for me, why should I take propositions that I actually believe as a basis for action and reasoning rather than some others that I don't believe but would be rational in believing? Why should my beliefs be privileged in my practical and theoretical deliberations over equally rational alternative beliefs? Suppose that due to a bump in the head, I lose my belief in P and forget that I ever held it. The epistemology oracle informs me that believing P is just one of a range of epistemically permissible options for me given my evidence. In figuring out what to believe now, surely the fact that I used to believe P is entirely irrelevant. I might just as well start over again and form a new rational belief. Why then should it be any different if I still happen to believe P? Yeah, there is something to that, Vipers. Here is a possible response. To vote not guilty when I'm rightly sure. Again, they're very confident in their rightness. That Smith is a committed murderer amounts to deliberately trying to bring about an injustice. Pleonasm is the addition and use of extra, added, spare, unnecessary, redundant, superfluous, or surplus, unneeded, and uncalled for words in addition to and on top of what is necessary or essential or required or obligatory or vital or requisite or crucial. I'm not sure I got it. Is there anything else you can use to describe a pleonasm? Yeah. I mean, it's one of these just infections of philosophy because people get so risk averse. They're so worried about being misunderstood that they say everything. And I think it obscures what their entire message was. This whole point of this paper, and we're getting towards the end, is basically that if you believe something, you shouldn't go back on what you believe. But that's a no shit Sherlock statement. So it's like, yeah. O'Neill says, from my online research in the past couple of minutes, looks like the first appearance of Spartan's Will was around 2014. I hadn't realized that it was the official thing rather than just a common tagline until looking a bit ago. Off topic by addressing your question, more interesting than the paper. Yeah. I mean, how you design mottos and like charters and like constitutions, that's interesting stuff. But like you can see, people are starting to move away from like these big ideas because they realize big ideas are not actually very helpful. So, okay. This is surely wrong, regardless of whether a different degree of conviction would be equally rational. Yeah, similarly to reason from propositions one takes to be false is to purposefully undermine the aim of inquiry, namely to reach the truth. Again, is it really to reach the truth? Is that what the only aim of inquiry is? Might not be the only aim of inquiry. Again, like I was saying, in the legal setting, it's to does the evidence get to the bar set by the legal stuff. The truth doesn't actually get into it. It's does the evidence get you over the legal bar? And that's what I think is the problem here. There's multiple standards at work. And taking pills that change one's belief is not a rational option, even if the resulting beliefs are such that one could have rationally held them given one's evidence. For taking such a pill amounts to attempting to deceive oneself. To induce a belief that one takes to be false violates the aim of believing only what is true. Yeah. What this reply suggests is that I've inappropriately been taking a third-person approach and questioning the relevance of what my beliefs happen to be if alternative attitudes are permissible. Okay. Rather, what I must ask myself is, in my deliberations is whether P. Since I can't help but answer from my own perspective, my answer will correspond to what I happen to believe. But it is the apparent fact that P which is relevant, not the fact that I happen to believe it. If my aim is to convict Smith if and only if he is guilty, then the question I must answer is whether he is guilty. No! Again, this is not how the legal thing works. They're conflating what you believe truth is implicator with what the legal system wants. Like, this is the whole point of the scummy defense lawyer, to show that there are ways out. That's how the legal system works. It's not that they are guilty or innocent. You only prove someone is not guilty. You do not prove them innocent. That is what happens in the legal system. There is no definition of innocence in the United States, or it's only mentioned like 4 times or 5 times I've heard. There is only the not guilty. There is no innocence. You're not actually proving somebody innocent. Yeah. So if I answer that yes, he is guilty, then of course I should vote accordingly, for a guilty person should be convicted. From my perspective, it is the fact as I take it that he is guilty that is a sufficient reason to convict him. Yeah, see, the fact that you think he's guilty is a sufficient reason, but it may not be legal. Alright, not the fact that I happen to believe that he's guilty. So whether or not the beliefs that I happen to hold are epistemically obligatory is just not relevant to whether I should act on them or reason from them. See, that's weird, because you are not following the judge's instructions then. I don't find this response entirely satisfying, for it seems that at least in some cases my assessment of the epistemic status of a belief can legitimately override my own take on the facts in a theoretical and practical deliberation. Yeah. Suppose that due to irrational fears, I can't help but think that my plane will crash. Yet I'm well aware that the statistical data makes it unreasonable to believe this. It is not that I take myself to have some special insight that can override the regular evidence. I realize that my belief is irrational, but I just can't manage to abandon it. Admittedly, this is a very odd state to be in. It is crucial to this case that I genuinely expect a plane to crash, and I don't merely fear that it will. While genuinely recognizing the epistemic irrationality of my attitude, I don't merely recognize that according to typical epistemological theories, it would count as irrational. But I would suggest that it is at least possible to get into such a state, even if it involves severe cognitive dissonance. Yeah. So, I mean, again, you're not talking about what you think you're talking about what you think the world is. That's all they're saying here. But again, they've defined it that way. It seems to me that in this situation it would be quite reasonable just to force myself to board the plane, or perhaps ask someone to drag me on. Yeah, I mean, there's a time where people get drunk and they go on the airplane. Like they knock themselves out with pills and get on the airplane. This happens all the time. Depending on how urgent my flight was, it might be irresponsible not to do so. Similarly, it may be appropriate to take a pill to help me believe the plane is safe. Yeah, that's exactly what alcohol does. You stop caring. So like you take a drug that makes you not care. Get like some laughing gas or whatever. If my faculties were functioning as they should, my recognition of the irrationality of my belief would cause me to abandon this belief and attain the rational conviction that the plane will not crash. As I'm aware of this but still can't overcome my senses, a magic pill may be useful to nudge my beliefs into order. But you see how disconnected this is? People do this all the time. They drug themselves to get liquid courage, they call like alcohol, liquid courage, because you're not actually believing that you are, like, most of the time. I mean, maybe some people actually believe themselves to be really good looking when they're drunk. But, like, I don't think that's it. It mostly makes you forget all the worries that you had. So, like, this example, while kind of correct on the surface, I think kind of misses the point. This happens all the time, but, like, it doesn't work the way they say it's happening. It's not like you're taking a drug to make you believe something. You're taking a drug to make you ignore that your irrational thoughts, or maybe irrational thoughts, depending. But it's really weird because they say, nudge my beliefs. That's not what happens in real life. But like, the situation is weird. Okay. Now, in a sense, forcing myself on the plane while believing it will crash almost amounts to attempting suicide. I may not intend to die, but I'm acting in a way that I fully expect to have this consequence. Similarly, if I take the pill to induce the belief that the plane is safe, I am trying to adopt a view that I take to be false. Nevertheless, it seems quite appropriate to do so in this case. Instead of acting on what I take to be the facts, I step outside my own perspective, so to speak, and let my epistemological convictions guide me. Even though I expect the plane to crash and take the belief that it won't to be false, I correctly take the rationality of the belief that the plane is safe as the best guide in action. For rationality is the best guide to truth. Again, how the fuck do they know that? And when it conflicts with my own view on things, it is best that the rationality wins out. Excuse me. Yeah. Again, they have a very strong belief in rationality, which may not be holding over like time and space. Okay. Now, if my epistemic convictions can legitimately overrule my beliefs in a case where they conflict, it's hard to see why this should not be appropriate if rationality neither conflicts with my beliefs nor dictates what they should be. I should be able to consider my views from the outside, as it were, and recognize that as far as rationality is concerned, they are on a par with various competing views. As there is no better guide to the truth than a rational assessment of the evidence, I should see that there is no advantage to acting on. Again, this fucking guide to the truth. No one knows what this is, and so then you're defining rationality circularly in terms of it. I should see that there is no advantage to acting on or reasoning from my actual beliefs rather than other rational alternatives. But as I have argued, this leads to various absurdities. And let me just point out, look, if you're talking about scientific truth, fine, but like we already know that. Let's assume science gets what it does, but science gets things with like error bars. It gets things within like statistical amounts. That's fine. But like the idea that like in your person you're getting to the truth, you're not doing science. That's not what you're doing in your person. You're acting in a different way. And so yeah. You must be found confidence, and that includes my paper and questions. Yeah, how the fuck do you know that? If anyone starts defining things circularly like this, then yes, Vipers. Yeah, why wouldn't I call them out and be like, look, this was by definition. What more did you add in your argument? Like, I wouldn't be that much of a jerk about it, but like, seriously, if someone makes this sort of mistake in like their way they're reasoning, it's like, then yes, I should call that out. Epistemological circle jerk, yeah. But I mean, that's all of epistemology nowadays, but most of philosophy anyway. Epistemology is not really any worse than anyone else, I guess. A lot of this is circle jerky. Okay, conclusion. I've been drawing out some of the difficulties we face by being epistemically permissive to various degrees. These arguments should tend to push us toward a less permissive account of rationality and perhaps all the way to uniqueness. This will have the consequence both for our general theory of rationality and specific issues such as what impact disagreement with peers should have on our convictions. Perhaps whether or not uniqueness is tolerable, all things considered, is yet to be seen. Hooray! Okay. Time to review now. And keep in mind, I am particularly hard on epistemology. It annoys me when things I think are obvious are not taken as obvious. So it's like this is not actually that bad as far as epistemology goes. What's the youngest philosophy paper that can be considered vintage? Anything before 1950 is going to be pretty old at this point. The modern sense of like the current academia is post World War II. So pre-World War II is kind of a different time in philosophy. Then after World War II, there was a whole bunch of things, sort of like academia sort of started to grow at that point. So like a paper from the 70s, it won't look like it's not like a paper from today, but like basically anything before 1950 is going to be very different than anything after, like, you know, then you got like from 50 to the 90s, and then you got like the 2000s where you got the internet and things started getting weird. So like it depends like what you're talking about, but like if you're talking about like 40s and 50s papers, you're getting back into like different times. Then like the 60s and 70s, it starts like changing, I think. So yeah. But anyway, everyone here is welcome to vote. This was epistemology. Tindaris, thank you for voting. Voted nay. We've got the golden turd and the nog grapes. So as you can see, the nog grapes is they made big claims, and Tindaris did not think that they got there, and also gave it the turd. So they tried to do a lot of style, but it was all shit underneath. So they both failed in. They just tried to cover up that they had that they said anything with their style, and they also made claims that they didn't get to. That's how it goes. Yeah, so I'm gonna have to go with the turd again because I agree with the Nog turd, because they did a lot of sort of argumentation, but I thought it was all just by definition. Kind of zoned out by the second paragraph, to take it for its worth. That's fine. So yeah, Vipers gave it a meh. I'm kind of on the vote meh. Again, it's not actually the worst epistemology paper I've read. So I'm giving it a turd and a meh so far. I don't know if it made really big claims. It didn't make huge claims, so I'm not giving about the... you're still welcome to add it to it if you want to, Tinderis. I don't think it made that many big claims. They argued against a position in philosophy, and, okay. Yeah, it seems relatively famous in epistemology. That's fine. I don't have to like it. I mean, if it's a well-downloaded paper and people really like it, it could... MDD. Permissivism may have been a big thing back in the day. And this kind of is like, look, if you're going to stick to your definitions, permissivism seems stupid then. That is fine. But, that is not on this author. The author may be 100% pointing out that everyone else was stupid. That would be very good about this author, but that doesn't look very good for epistemology either then. Yeah. Partly why you chose it, yeah. Okay, so good for this author for pointing out something very silly that was in the literature. So maybe a lot of the problems are not the author's fault in this case. That doesn't make me like the paper better, it just means it's a product of the time. That's all. I mean, I don't have to like this. Oh, and as always, as I was saying, I'm hard on epistemology. I'm very hard on epistemology. So, yep. But everyone, get your... Yeah, it leans so hard on your rational belief, so hard on your understanding of rationality. So this sort of first person sense of rationality that, oh, I have a rational belief. Yeah, exactly, Unreal Brian. Of course I can read it, and I can tell you why I dislike it. Like I told you, I have a stronger sense of cultural relativity on rationality. I think they basically... given their definitions and the way they set up the paper, their conclusions were inevitable. They just followed. But again, why would I don't have to accept their definitions on rationality for this stuff? And that's my problem. So yeah. Viper says, when you reach a milestone, you should make a list of top 20 papers. I'm going to do that as soon as I get my website up, because all the ratings are going to have a numerical value attached to them. And then when the website, it'll, then I'll be able to rank things by, number. So we'll have a top papers, worst papers, things like that. So that's in the works, Vipers. I don't know if you were here earlier, but I have now 4 papers under review, 1 forthcoming, and I'm fucking tired. And I literally just sent the last paper I had to send out this afternoon. So, that's how it goes. Okay, but anyway, last 60 seconds. If anyone wants to get your review in, please do. I just don't have a whole lot to say about this. If it was a product of the time and that's why I dislike it, well, so be it. And good for the author for, pointing it out. But the fact that philosophy in the 2000s was silly, sure. It's just I don't find anything very interesting here. Maybe that's because I was around back then and I knew that it was silly back then, and it was like, well, why would I bother? Yeah. This thing where they're like, oh, if I went to MIT, I'd believe one thing. If I went to Berkeley, I'd believe something else. It's like, I think that's trivializing cultural relativity. It's like, okay, and then well, oh yeah, if you feel one way, you should definitely believe that. No shit.